Despite a bit of controversy that we'll dive into today, the overall reaction to Gilliman's return was overwhelmingly positive. He was a son of the Imperium's god, returned to them at their hour of need. It literally was the most Jesus-esque Messiah bullshit ever that did nothing but confirm and elevate their beliefs. The Ultramarines were ecstatic and instantly more or less reformed their legion under his banner without question, helping Gilliman to reach Terra. Imperial forces on Terra were more than friendly to G-Man, with the Sisters of Silence helping him to defeat Magnus, and then the Custodian Guard fighting alongside him at the Lion's Gate during a very random Cornite invasion of Terra. All in all, a very good first impression that went a long way to affirming Gilliman's return as a genuine boon for the Loyalists, and not just some cheeky, schemy shit by Titsnitch. In saying that though, the Custodes did not trust Gilliman. The Primarchs had ruined their lord's dream and doomed mankind to a slow decay, but they also really didn't give a shit. They were literally like, boo-hoo, Mr. Mathematics has returned with his big space book. The Custodes know the truth of the Imperium, what occurred during the Horus Heresy, and what the Primarchs were like. They honestly just didn't really give much of a shit. They were happy for Gilliman to take leadership of the Imperium, as that still didn't give him authority or command over the Custodian Guard. It was only when Gilliman met with his father and then the Emperor gave the Custodians the order to help Gilliman via his emissaries, which are special custodians who can speak to the Emperor in their dreams, did they step up to the plate and actually begin working with him. Who gave the Custodians the order to guard. It was only when Gilliman met with his father and then the Emperor gave the Custodians the order to help Gilliman via his emissaries, which are special custodians who can speak to the Emperor in their dreams, did they step up to the plate and actually begin working with him. At this point, they were well and truly Team G-Man, with a number of them even actually being inspired by him and admiring him. They never totally trusted him though. Many of the Custodes with him theorized how many of them it would take to kill him, and they had numerous contingencies in case the Lord of Ultramar went rogue. The Sisters of Silence were in a similar boat to the Custodes, although a lot less expressive. I'll tie the reaction of the Sisters of Battle to that of the Ecclesiarchy. The Sisters of Battle haven't had much screen time with G-Man, however their panties have been destroyed by the female ejaculate equivalent of Niagara Falls. They are hyper-religious, so seeing Gilliman return is like the fucking best. I mean, the Sisters literally shit the bed whenever they see a Custodian Guard, so imagine how they feel about Gilliman. Not to mention, he was resurrected with the help of Saint Celestine and fought alongside her in his opening years. As she is the sister of all sisters, Gilliman had all the endorsements he ever needed. However, the Ecclesiarchy wasn't so clean cut. See, the Sisters of Battle had a purpose. They killed bad guys with extreme prejudice and effectiveness. The Ecclesiarchy killed innocent people and fiddled the kiddles diddles. Gilliman was enraged that they even existed, as it was the complete opposite of what his father wanted, and his initial reaction was the desire to tear it all down. However, he stopped when he realized how destructive that would be, and how faith was one of the only things keeping the Imperium together. He had a priest, a representative of the Ecclesiarchy, accompanying him who wanted to suck his ultracock. The priest would occasionally say shit that would piss Gilliman off. G-Man would get angry, and I shit you not, the priest got religiously turned on by the thought of him getting killed by Gilliman. After G-Man had assessed the situation and disposed of a few bad actors within the upper echelon of the Ecclesiarchy, he concluded that whilst this wasn't ideal, the faith of the Ecclesiarchy and its influence could be a powerful tool for good. So he basically said what he needed to say to get them on side, often debating with a few of the priests, but overall indulging their religious fantasies. I mean, Gilliman himself has started questioning if the Emperor is a god, since the Chaos Gods are clearly real. Overall, it's very interesting watching such a practical dude deal with shit such as faith and religion. Gilliman's experience with the High Lords of Terra, however, didn't go as cleanly. When he returned, he more or less instantly took control of the Imperium, ordering a planet-wide purge of hidden Xenos, mutants, chaos cults, and many corrupt officials. Millions were killed within weeks. He also heavily curbed the power of the High Lords as a loyalty test. Most of them passed, however a few were forced to retire or felt as if they had lost too much power. Hence they attempted a coup that involved Custodian Guards fighting Minotaur Space Marines, before the coup was crushed and its members killed. The head of the Navigator Houses, once one of the most powerful people in the galaxy, tried to extort Gilliman and get more wealth to allow G-Man to use his Navigators. Gilliman responded by having him flogged and dragged through the streets. Needless to say, Gilliman got his Navigators without paying a single dollar over what they had agreed on. Either through diplomacy, execution, or humiliation, G-Man was able to get each and every High Lord on side in record time, making them very focused and competent while he went off to pursue his legendary Indomitus Crusade. Speaking of the Indomitus Crusade, how about the Imperial Navy? How did they react? Well, whilst they also fell in line, a lot of them weren't super stoked. The Navy isn't the most religious organization. It's full of proud, practical men and women who think very highly of themselves and who honor tradition. So Guilliman returning wasn't this holy shit, God is back type of vibe. G-Man is a micromanager that doesn't give a shit about people's traditions or pride. To him, warships are pieces on a chessboard. Their value is what they can do for him and the Imperium. He will always choose the best ship to lead in the most optimal engagements. He doesn't give a fuck if one ship has more honors or a better pedigree. The Navy, on the other hand, does. There was a battle group commander who, after railing a bunch of space coke, went on a massive rant about Guilliman and how the Primarch's institutions didn't rename her battle group correctly after they had merged with one another. She was very unhappy about it, upset that her glorious battleship wasn't the new name of her merged battle group due to technicalities. Guilliman also felt a similar way about the Imperial Navy, hating their desire for glory and honor, which they seem to put ahead of actually decent battle strategies. Whenever he senses one of them putting pride ahead of practicality, he immediately removes them from command. In one such engagement, he even gave command to the Mechanicus fleet accompanying them, because they had the best plan to deal with an enemy stronghold. For context, Guilliman has never really given a shit about battle fleet honor, preferring to use a swarm of smaller ships to give the enemy a death by 1,000 cuts, as well as provide himself with a lot of tactical options rather than having these fuck-off massive warships that just bomb each other's tits off until the one with the thicker shields and bigger guns wins. And he was right. He was able to take out the Wordbearer's flagship and also nearly claim the World Eater's flagship in one engagement, using a ragtag makeshift fleet of smaller ships. Overall though, despite their grievances, no Imperial ship commander is disobeying Guilliman or turning to chaos purely because he's got a bit of an overbearing boss that doesn't care about tradition. It's more so, just petty ranting. I know, you want to know how the Space Marines reacted. Well, 95% of it was similar to the Ultramarines. Fuck yeah, a loyalist Primarch is back, let's get this bread. However, the 5% were very interesting and kind of embarrassing. As mentioned, the Minotaurs helped a few of the ex-High Lords with their coup attempt against Guilliman, and were only called off at the last minute. This wasn't really them reacting as much as it was them being completely loyal to specific individuals. The Blood Angels were saved by Guilliman's arrival during the devastation of Baal, hence they were honoured to see him and gratefully took the Primaris reinforcements he offered. Well, other than Gabriel Seth. He wasn't too happy about it. The Imperial Fists were also happy, being one of the first chapters to greet Guilliman due to their role as the Praetorians of Terror. The Dark Angels acted like fucking morons, which was disappointing as they are one of my favourite chapters. Basically, they thought Guilliman was coming to them in person because he found out about the Fallen. They were like, shit, he's gonna murder our asses. Maybe we should blow up his ship and kill him, then try cover it up. Yeah, they literally thought that. Fortunately, that moment of retardation passed, and they spoke with G-Man and are now firmly on his side when they realized he just wanted to give them fancy new Space Marine warriors. The meeting with the Black Templars was spicy. Helbrecht is a staunch, honourable man who doesn't get talked down to ever. He debated and even beefed with Guilliman. G-Man wanted him to help the wider Imperium. Helbrecht wanted to keep chasing Ghazghkull. Eventually, G-Man convinced him to abandon his selfish crusade in favour of helping the Imperium, but it was probably the most grief G-Man had gotten so far. To make matters worse, a sub-faction within the Black Templars rejected their Primaris reinforcements and started killing them, creating a mini-civil war that the Custodes themselves had to get involved in. Just goes to show that weaponized autism is a double-edged blade. We haven't seen many of the other original chapters' reactions to Guilliman. However, since pretty much everyone has taken up the Primaris and happily uses them, it's safe to say that the reactions have been very positive across the board. The Inquisition's reaction to Guilliman is a hard one to pinpoint, as there are so many conflicting sub-factions within it. Some would be stoked, some would be cautious, some are probably plotting his assassination, some are probably plotting to stop the plots of his assassination. We haven't had much in the way of in-law examples. However, the High Lord representative of the Inquisition is on G-Man's side for now, so we can assume most of them are as well. The Mechanicus is also pretty pro-G-Man and reacted positively. After all, Belsarius Cawl was instrumental in Guilliman's resurrection, and he is one of the Mechanicus' top dogs. It isn't all sunshine and rainbows though. Many of the cult Mechanicus are scared of invention and innovation, something that Guilliman has now authorized and encouraged, whilst others, like Cawl, love that shit and have been very happy with the new order. Either way, Gilliman is a much more effective and efficient leader of the Imperium, two things that get a tech priest's cogs all nice and oily. While the initial reactions were a bit all over the place, everyone has fallen in line one way or another. This is why the Indomitus Crusade was so successful. An Imperium united and purged of corruption, pooling its resources into a common goal, is an Imperium that's going to be pretty hard to stop. Just goes to show that mankind has always been capable of winning 40k, they just had to get out of their own way. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then pick up the hoodie. Buy one, get 2 t-shirts free is a pretty moist deal. Hit the subscribe button and hit the real subscribe button for more reactful content. Join the Discord for more memes and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Bow to me.
G'day guys and gals. G'day guys and for November and is a software that basically cheers to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Today we'll go over how each of the main characters and factions reacted to Gilliman's revival. We'll also look at why they may have reacted the way that they did. Let's get into it. The most standout thing about Gilliman's revival is that it was wildly unexpected. Absolutely nobody foresaw it happening, so it was a total surprise to even the most powerful and accurate fortune tellers. It also completely altered and changed all the galaxy's prophecies and future predictions, throwing the setting into genuine doubt for the first time in a while. Like previously, all anyone saw was that eventually Chaos would win, but with Gilliman's return, it's thrown a spanner in the works, and now nobody really knows exactly what is going to happen. As such, everyone, even the Emperor, was surprised. So firstly, how did the Imperium and its people react? Well, to nobody's surprise, everyone was pretty stoked that a demigod son of the Emperor who wasn't a demon or a weirdo had woken up. The ecclesiarchy got all religious about it, as they do, which made Gilliman pretty uncomfortable. However, whilst everyone was all smiles and waves, a number of powerful and influential members of the Imperium were not too happy. See, they held massive swathes of power, and the return of Gilliman basically threatened their sphere of influence. Hence, numerous High Lords planned a rebellion against Gilliman, which was pretty fucking retarded, but hey, this is the Imperium we're talking about. Gilliman was able to slap down that rebellion with less than a flick of a dick, before taking complete control of the Imperium. In case you were wondering, Gilliman reacted very poorly to the Imperium. He basically said it was so shit that Horus may as well have won. Others in the Imperium, especially in the Inquisition, were notably concerned about how he was resurrected. After all, he basically got queefed on by the prophet of an Eldar death god whilst getting his nuts tasered by a Magos who has been repeatedly accused of tech heresy in order for Gilliman to wake up. It's not clear if his resurrection method is public knowledge or not, but there would be many who suspect, with the Puritan Inquisitors definitely having an issue with it. However, it's kinda like knowing a dark secret about the popular kid at school. One day you decide to share the dark secret and say that the cool kid isn't actually cool, but turns out the cool kid is so cool that even leaking his dark secret does nothing but turn everyone against you. Same situation here, except instead of your classmates telling you to fuck off, you'd have G-Man's big ass blue fist caving your skull in no time. The Custodes reacted pretty much how you would expect. They were like, cool man, daddy loves us more. In seriousness, Gilliman arrived on Terra during a huge battle against Cornite forces and he kinda saved the day, so the Custodes did have respect for him for that. It was also made obvious that Gilliman had the Emperor's blessing, hence the Custodes were happy to engage with Gilliman and take his suggestions on board. The support from the Custodes is actually what gives Gilliman so much legitimacy as Lord of the Imperium. If they told him to get fucked, it probably would have resulted in a civil war. The Space Marines overwhelmingly reacted positively, even the ones that you would expect to be a bit shaky. The Black Templars, Blood Angels, and others received Gilliman with open arms. It helps that he brought them Primaris reinforcements and high-key saved the Blood Angels. The Dark Angels, in a moment of spurginess, thought Gilliman was coming to punish them for the Fallen, hence they genuinely considered firing on his ship and killing him. Fortunately, they didn't do that, and they ended up gladly chatting to the returned Primarch. It goes without saying that, yes, the Sisters of Battle collectively finger blasted at the new him, coming to punish them for the Fallen. Dark Angels, in a moment of spur
Azrael, the Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, stared down the massive fleet. He had never seen anything quite like it. They called it the Indomitus Crusade, and it was led by none other than Rabute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines. Azrael figures this must be the end of the Unforgiven. The Avenging Sun has superhuman intelligence, and rumour has it the fallen angel Cypher aided the Primarch in his return to Terra. This means the Lord Commander of the Imperium is likely well aware of the shameful history of the Dark Angels and is bringing judgment upon the Sons of the Lion. He considers his options: they could run or they could stand and fight. But should the last act of the Sons of the Lion be to stand against his brother and the greatest hope for humanity? Not today. Guilliman proceeded unheeded and entered the rock, but unbeknownst to everybody there, he was actually incredibly close to his sleeping brother. Azrael was revealed to be wrong, as Guilliman did not bring censure, but in fact, reinforcement. Azrael, the
Did you know that when Dante met the returned Rabute Guilliman for the first time, the ancient Blood Angel thought he was hallucinating? As shown in Devastation of Baal, Dante had seen the Primarch before, shut away in a stasis field in the Fortress of Hera, where he sat a second away from death. The Primarch's physical presence hit Dante hard, a monument in flesh. Ignoring the hurt of his healing wounds, Dante fell to his knees.
Can it really be true? Is it really you? Do you live?
The Primarch came down the steps.
Get up, Dante. I will not accept displays of humility from a man like you. You are one of the few in this era to have earned the right to speak to me on equal terms. Now rise.
Dante grunted with pain as he attempted to get to his feet.
Never kneel before me again. I will have you stand with me as a mark of respect. I will order you not to if I must. I would rather our relationship not function on those terms.
Is this a dream or a vision?
Neither. I live. I have returned to save the Imperium.
Welcome, fellow Indomitus Crusade. Resorted to forbidden the First Legion Tyranids during the Indomitus Crusade. You will hear how the First Legion, pressed to the edge of annihilation, resorted to forbidden weaponry that scorched an entire world from existence, and how Guilliman himself descended to judge them amidst the ashes. Sit by the fireplace and join me in this tale of grim necessity, loyalty, and the unbroken legacy of the Emperor's firstborn sons. When word reached Guilliman that Sechar VI had been saved, but at a terrible price, he resolved to see the aftermath himself. The Primarch took one of the Custodes' personal vessels and descended to the planet's surface, bringing Tribune Colquan and 3 warriors as escort. From orbit, he had glimpsed the Eben Huntress, a venerable ship of the First Legion that had survived the Rangdan Xenocides, the Heresy, and the Scouring, yet had been left crippled by the Tyranid assault. Guilliman understood how close the Imperium had come to losing a relic of its own history. Now he descended into a world reduced to ruin. The atmosphere was poisoned and the soil lifeless, a planet rendered uninhabitable for millennia. And there, amid the wasteland, stood the survivors of the Dark Angels, a fifth of the chapter, their armor blackened, their robes scorched, waiting in silence for judgment. As Guilliman approached, the warriors of the First Legion knelt. Asteran, master of the Third Company, pledged his loyalty and swore that the actions taken had been necessary. Guilliman's gaze lingered on their weapons, relics unseen since the darkest days of the Scouring, and on the hulking automata that loomed behind them. Tribune Colquan called it an abomination, a necessary evil that should never have walked the field of war. Guilliman asked if it had truly been needed. Asteran answered with the calm certainty of one who knew no other choice existed. The odds and the stakes demanded the sacrifice of Sechar VI. They had unleashed the First Legion's most terrible secrets to save the Imperium from the hive mind, and in doing so, had become again the angels of death they were always meant to be. Guilliman accepted their oath of silence, but felt the weight of his father's legacy press upon him. He could not allow the truth of Sechar VI to spread, not while the Imperium's unity was so fragile. He ordered the destruction of records, the erasure of data logs, and the mind-wiping or redeployment of witnesses. To the Imperium at large, Sechar VI would be remembered only as a world lost to a catastrophic reactor malfunction. Before departing, Guilliman turned once more to the Dark Angels and addressed them by their ancient title, Knights of Caliban, telling them that their Primarch would be proud. Some stood taller at his words, others seemed unsettled, but all remained silent. Guilliman left the scorched planet with the grim understanding that the First Legion had not changed. They remained secretive, proud, and terribly dangerous. And though he had preserved their secret this day, he could not escape the thought that one day those secrets might burn the Imperium anew.
G'day guys and gal, it's no secret that some Primarchs were more liked than others. Sanguinius was universally loved, Horus universally admired, and Ferrus universally respected, at least prior to the heresy. Others were more controversial and had their shares of haters and fans, like Magnus or Jagadai. However, there was a few select Primarchs that nobody liked: Angron, Conrad Kurz, and Rabute Guilliman. Now it's easy to understand why the roid-raging nutjob and the baby-skinning psychopath weren't very popular, but why was the Lord of Ultramar, one of the most effective and successful of all Primarchs, almost universally disliked by all of his brothers prior to the heresy? Why did all the Primarchs hate Rabute Guilliman? Before we get started, you may remember me talking a fair bit about Dice Dioramas last month, my new membership platform where we give away an epic diorama every month. We've given away a 1/6 Titus statue, an epic 29 model Lion vs Angron diorama, and we're now wrapping up building our legendary Rylanor's Last Stand diorama, which I'll share more info on soon. However, the point of this today is that we wanted extra time to finish Rylanor's Last Stand, so we decided the next giveaway would be an absolutely insane $2,000 3,000 point Blood Angel army that we're giving away this Wednesday, midnight Australia time. Now, being a DICE member means you're automatically entered into every single giveaway, with entries based on your membership tier. However, I know that subscriptions can be a bit cringe, so we've just unveiled our new boost feature. You can pay one time and one time only to enter into a specific giveaway. Basically, you can pick what type of boost you want, and then which giveaway you want the boost to apply to, and then bang, you'll be entered in with only one purchase, no lock-in. This will also grant you 30 days of DICE membership, which gives you access to our partner discount codes, our private Discord server where we host pro painter workshops, and more. Current members can also use this membership boost feature if they want to stack up some extra entries for a particularly spicy giveaway they're interested in. So if you're a bronze member and you're creaming for a Blood Angel army, you can diamond boost your account to maximize your entries for the month. You can also stack boosts on top of each other if you're really fucking keen for a particular giveaway. But yeah, no more commitment if you don't want to. This is also a great opportunity to try out Dice Dioramas and see if you like the community. You can do a bronze boost for only one $10 payment, get access to the Blood Angel giveaway and other benefits, and then at the end of the 30-day boost period, you can see if you want to stay on or not. But yeah, massive Blood Angel giveaway this Wednesday. Still time to join DICE or get a membership boost for your chance to win. Link below to join or find out more. Today we'll discuss why Guilliman was so disliked by his brothers, both loyalist and traitor. A lot of the focus will be pre-heresy, as obviously post-heresy the hatred is more understandable. Let's get into it. In terms of the Primarchs, Guilliman was about as close to a perfect son as could be. He was a disciplined commander, a great statesman, a fair ruler, and basically did everything right in terms of by the book. Now you may know people like this in your life, maybe not Primarch tier, but everyone who seems to get everything right and succeed because it seems like God is on their side or something. There's also a chance you likely resent or dislike these people, maybe out of jealousy, maybe because you think they're a self-righteous, arrogant, entitled dick. This was Guilliman to a lot of his brothers. G-Man also lacked a lot of flair and spark that the Primarchs respected. Crusade. They were diverse, flawed, and mighty warrior demigods. They respected strength. To them, Guilliman was a pencil humper that fought war as a distant, cold, math-loving commander, not as a legendary war leader taking the field of battle and becoming a legend of myth. Now, the Emperor low-key disliked Guilliman as well, despite being impressed with his record and empire. However, not all Primarchs disliked Guilliman for the same reason, so let's check them out one by one. The Lion was not much of a fan of G-Man until later in the Heresy. Both Primarchs were rivals as their Crusade records were on par with each other in terms of compliances. The Lion was more dashing, mysterious, and legendary, making Guilliman quite jealous of him. When G-Man saw the Lion during the Heresy, he noticed that the Lion was slightly taller. In return, the Lion had thousands of Dark Angels waiting in drop pods in orbit, waiting for the order to rain down and destroy the Ultramarines, as he did not trust that Guilliman wasn't using the Heresy as an excuse to make Ultramar independent. The Lion saw Guilliman as superficial and trying too hard to seem perfect. Many of the Primarchs also saw G-Man as dull and boring, no excitement, just an automata. However, in truth, the Lion did also secretly harbour admiration and jealousy for Guilliman. There was a lot of tension between the two during Imperium Secundus, and they raged at each other multiple times. However, by the end of Secundus, they were extremely close and had nothing but respect for each other after going through so much together, lending credit to the theory that the Primarchs that disliked Guilliman were the ones that knew him the least. Fulgrim found Guilliman to be extremely dull and boring, which is no surprise. Whilst Fulgrim wanted to make a show of everything, Guilliman wanted to achieve success in the most practical, straightforward way possible. However, Fulgrim was also jealous of Guilliman. Whilst the Ultramarines were dominating the galaxy, the Emperor's children were just barely getting started due to their gene seed issues. So combining Fulgrim finding G-Man lame with jealousy makes for a toxic level of resentment. Just before Fulgrim and Guilliman were to battle post-heresy, Fulgrim said that whilst he found Guilliman dull, he was the best of them, showing that whilst they may not like him, many Primarchs begrudgingly respected what he had achieved. Perturabo hates everyone, including himself, so I would say that also extends to G-Man. However, surprisingly, Guilliman was one of the Primarchs Perty hated the least, likely because their attitudes were so similar. The most practical approach to victory is the best. Neither had much desire to waste resources on flair or style points, with Perty actually building a magnificent clock tower on Macragge for Guilliman. Even in the current setting and post-heresy, Perturabo hasn't directed much attention towards sabotaging or invading Macragge, perhaps out of a subconscious respect for Guilliman, so yeah, surprisingly, Perty didn't actually seem to mind him. The Khan and Guilliman didn't understand each other very well, nor did they speak or hang out much. Guilliman was rigid, the Khan was like the wind. They were almost as opposite as physically possible. Despite this, Guilliman admired the hell out of the Khan, but we don't know how the Khan felt. However, it's likely that he liked some things about Guilliman, like his empire being founded on respect for its people, whilst he disliked other things, such as the predictability and rigidity of the Ultramarines. Now, whilst Russ was definitely one of the Primarchs that found Guilliman and his methods of war boring, they actually got along pretty well. Guilliman thought Russ was awesome, and that his loyalty to the Emperor shamed the rest of them. Guilliman was envious of Russ's free spirit, and how he just said what he wanted all the time, whilst Guilliman was always playing the role of the political statesman who had to measure every word and sentence. There's a lot of examples of Guilliman liking Russ and speaking highly of him. Not too many the other way round, but we can assume they got on well, and it's not just Guilliman sucking up to a brother that despised him. We can for sure say that Guilliman and Dawn got along great. Both were considered boring and dull by many of their brothers, as both were practical and sensible, traits which made them extremely effective Primarchs. Post-heresy, they disagreed a lot about what direction the Imperium should take, which definitely hurt their relationship. However, Guilliman trusted Dawn's capabilities as Defender of Terra, and Dawn was confident that when Guilliman arrived, they would crush the traitors between the hammer and anvil. Guilliman also stated that amongst all the Primarchs, Dawn was one of the few he would consider as a friend. There was a lot of respect there. Conrad did not like Guilliman at all, but that's not really a hot take. He once called him the Avenging Bean Counter as a dig of Guilliman being mostly concerned with the theory of war instead of actual war itself. Conrad terrorized Macragge for a while, partly out of practicality, but mostly to fuck with Guilliman's perfect empire and expose its flaws. Guilliman was everything that Conrad despised, a perfect leader of a perfect empire. As long as Guilliman existed, it showed Conrad the potential that he was the problem, and that if he could be better, he could have achieved just as much as Guilliman. Conrad couldn't face that truth, so he was hellbent on proving it wrong. Sanguinius was one of the few Primarchs Guilliman listed as a genuine friend, with Sanguinius loving him in return. However, there was a fair bit of tension between the two during Imperium Secundus, where Guilliman forced Sanguinius to become the new emperor out of practical need, which while Sangi understood, he still resented the role. However, by the end of the Secundus situation, they had grown even closer. Guilliman was shattered when he found out about Sanguinius' death. Sanguinius, being as perceptive and empathetic as he was, would have understood Guilliman and his desire to do good through overachieving as a great character trait as opposed to Guilliman trying to show off. Ferrus and Guilliman were actually very close. Whenever the Iron Hands and Ultramarines fought together, Ferrus felt like they were invincible and synergized fantastically. Although Ferrus didn't like to publicly admit his affection to anyone, he made it clear that he loved his brother. Guilliman felt the same way. When he found out that Vulcan, Corvus, and Ferris had been crushed at Isvan and were likely all dead, he said he missed Ferris the most. Overall, bittersweet. Angron and Guilliman despised each other. G-Man saw Angron as a mindless living weapon that had no purpose beyond war and death. Angron saw Guilliman as an arrogant wanker who thought he was better than everyone else. Just as bad as the High Riders who enslaved Angron when he was young. Going to war with each other didn't make things any better, with Angron attempting to viciously kill his brother who he saw as weak. Mortarion didn't have particularly strong feelings towards Guilliman pre-heresy, as Guilliman was not a psyker. Mortarion just thought he was dull and boring. However, with the Plague Wars in the recent setting, the brothers have formed an intense hatred of each other as they fought to destroy each other. When Mortarion found out Guilliman was being revived, he didn't take it too seriously, and he said he would have preferred a different, more interesting loyalist Primarch to return, like the Lion. Magnus and G-Man got on quite well pre-heresy. They were both quite progressive and shared a love of knowledge and learning. Prospero and McCragg were both shining beacons of what the Imperium could be after the wars were over. However, Guilliman became disgusted with Magnus after Magnus showed no self-control and dived too deep into the warp. After this, Guilliman thought Magnus was too arrogant. Magnus thought Guilliman was insignificant and weak and had no right to look down on him. Let's just say that post-Great Crusade, Magnus was an extremely insecure man. Pre-heresy, Horus and Guilliman got along great, with Horus being only one of 4 Primarchs G-Man considered a friend. Although their friendship vanished during the heresy, they still respected each other's supreme commanding abilities, with Horus being extremely wary of the threat of the Ultramarines, whilst Guilliman carefully considered each and every move he made against Horus, knowing his brother was brilliant at war. They never seemed to develop an intense hatred of each other, with Horus believing that upon killing the Emperor, Guilliman would bend the knee to him. A delusional thought perhaps, born of a subconscious desire to have Guilliman on his side. On the other hand, Guilliman and Lorgar hated each other, but it wasn't always so. Guilliman pitied Lorgar and his religious fanaticism. Lorgar thought Guilliman hated him, and he thought the Lord of Ultramar took pleasure in the raising of Monarchia. As such, Lorgar hated Guilliman with every fibre of his being. Hence, Lorgar was shocked and mortified when he finally faced Guilliman in battle, only to realise that G-Man never despised Lorgar until Lorgar attacked Ultramar. Lorgar realised that he, not G-Man, was the true asshole and he felt shame. However, they were way too far gone to ever reconcile, and both brothers will hate each other for the rest of their long lives. Guilliman and Vulcan didn't spend super long together at any point during the series. When Vulcan arrived in McCragg, he was insane and then dead, so we didn't even see them speak. However, with Vulcan's steadfastness, kindness, and good heart, I can't see why they wouldn't have gotten along. Corvus respected Guilliman greatly. When the two were playing simulated mock battles, Corvus managed to win the first few battles via using tactics Guilliman didn't expect, such as the power of civilian insurgents. However, Guilliman soon adapted, and Corvus could never beat him again. Corax also agreed with Guilliman's plan to break up the legions into chapters after the heresy, so whilst they don't seem like beer buddies, I'd say overall they liked each other enough. Guilliman and Alfarius hated each other. G-Man believed the Alpha Legion were a bunch of backstabbing, dishonorable cowards. The heresy, so whilst they don't seem like beer buddies, and insurgents. First few battles via using tactics Guilliman didn't expect. Playing simulated mock battles, Corvus managed to win the first few battles via using tactics Guilliman didn't expect, such as the power of civilian insurgents. However, Guilliman soon adapted, and Corvus could never beat him again. Corax also agreed with Guilliman's plan to break up the legions into chapters after the heresy, so whilst they don't seem like beer buddies, I'd say overall they liked each other enough. Guilliman and Alfarius hated each other. G-Man believed the Alpha Legion were a bunch of backstabbing, dishonorable cowards who overcomplicated things, whilst the Alpha Legion saw the Ultramarines as a bunch of predictable douchebags. The Alpha Legion loved fucking with the Ultramarines and found them easy to infiltrate. Neither Primarch respected the other, even prior to the Horus Heresy, both believing their methods of war were flawed. So overall, only 4 or 5 Primarchs were on good terms with G-Man prior to the Heresy. He pissed off most of them at some point or another, and whilst he managed to end up forming a good bond with almost all loyalist Primarchs, the traitors despised the shit out of him, with Magnus, Fulgrim, and and Mortarion all having a big crack at ending his life at some point or another. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then join Dice Dioramas via becoming a member or taking advantage of our new membership boost for your chance to win $2,000 worth of Blood Angels, or in the near future, a legendary Rylan Orvis Fulgrim diorama. Join the Discord for more memes and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Bow to me.
Leandros did nothing wrong is a phrase that for many within the 40k community, it probably generates a visceral feeling of disgust. And for good reason. He's easily the most hated character in the entire franchise. And not the good kind of hated like Erebus or Lucius, where they're really well written and the whole point is that you're supposed to hate them. Leandros is just annoying. He whinges and complains about everything Captain Titus, and by proxy we as the players attempt to do. For many, his name has become synonymous with betrayal and cowardice, which is the exact opposite of what an Ultramarine is supposed to be. It's honestly pretty difficult to go anywhere 40k's lore is being discussed, whether online or in person, without somebody jumping out of the woodwork to exclaim just how much they hate this character. He even has an entire subreddit dedicated specifically to hating on him, which admittedly isn't 100% unique, but it's still pretty impressive. Here's the thing though. What if I was to tell you that despite the numerous reasons why hating on this character is justified, a large portion of that hate is actually being misdirected and based on misconceptions? What if Leandros was actually right about everything? Now, I know that's kind of hard to even consider. Leandros isn't some larger-than-life, morally complex anti-villain, the type that seem to be way overused in media nowadays, that we can debate their ethics and morals. However, in recent times, I've personally been seeing a lot of hot takes about this character that don't seem to make any sense. Some of them are rather tame, and I can kind of sorta understand where they come from. Whereas others, and I'm gonna put this as lightly as possible, are wildly unhinged and miss the entire point of what 40k is all about. So today I want to do something a little bit different. I don't want to just explain why everybody hates a certain character. I want to try to play devil's advocate for them and actually defend the most hated character in all of 40k. I'm anticipating this video being a little bit more controversial than normal, and I'm definitely interested to hear what y'all's take is on this one in the comment section. Just do me a favor and hear me out, wait till the end of the video before you get out your pitchforks and torches. In this video, we're going to be talking about whether or not Leandros actually disrespected the chain of command when he summoned the Inquisition at the end of the first game. We're going to talk about the events of Space Marine 1 from his perspective, and we're going to dive into whether or not him becoming a chaplain was actually secretly a punishment. We're going to talk about all that and a whole lot more in this one, but before we dive headfirst into the grimdark, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. Now, I know this is going to come as a surprise to a few of you because I've definitely let myself go over the last year. Life's been pretty crazy, but I'm actually super big into exercising and going to the gym. I genuinely love lifting weights, swimming, really anything except for running. Not a fan of that. I got them short corgi legs. The big problem for me was pad thai. But aside from that, it was that I was never able to find a brand of athletic wear that I actually liked. And most of the ones I tried were either way too tight or weren't casual enough. But that all changed when I video. We were first introduced to the characters of Leandros and Captain Titus all the way back on September 6, 2011, with the release of the original Space Marine game. Although I and many other 40k fans absolutely loved this game, the sales numbers don't lie. The first game was a success for sure, but it never reached the heights of the big hitters of the time like Halo or Call of Duty. Meanwhile, Space Marine 2 sold over 7 million copies, bringing in a massive new wave of players, most of whom had no idea how big of a deal it was when the chaplain of the game finally took his helmet off at the end and revealed Leandros' soft, pudgy, punchable face that us old school fans absolutely despise. It's actually kind of amazing. Normally, a twist ending like that would get the audience hyped, but this might have been the first time I've ever seen the exact opposite happen. Everyone was loving this chaplain. He seemed like a no-nonsense badass. Then, all of a sudden, boom, it's Leandros, and all that goodwill vanished in a split second. I've got to imagine that most of the new fans were completely confused. They didn't understand why we were so angry. They don't know how he betrayed Captain Titus at the end of the first game. They don't know how his rigid devotion to the Codex Astartes made him unable to think for himself. They don't know how this arrogant rookie broke the chain of command and committed one of the biggest sins a Space Marine can. He snitched to the Inquisition. Now, that's the version of the story that most of the fan base has internalized, and I'll admit, I believed this myself for many years. But after recently replaying through both games, I gotta be honest, I'm starting to see Leandros a little bit differently. A lot of what I thought I knew way back when I originally played this game over a decade ago was based on old misconceptions that I had back then when I didn't know nearly as much about 40k as I do now. So this video is going to be my attempt to play devil's advocate for 40k's most hated character. First, we're going to do a super abridged recap of the first game, but from Leandros' perspective. Then we'll dive into the meat and potatoes of this video, where I break down and challenge the strongest arguments that fans have made against him over the years. Okay, so let's get into it. The first Space Marine game opens up with the Forge world of Graia being under siege by orcs, who have breached orbit and seized control of key anti-air defenses. Now, during the opening mission, Captain Titus makes a bold and arguably reckless decision to drop from a Thunderhawk mid-flight, crashing through the enemy fire to reach the surface. Even Sidonis, a seasoned veteran, questions this move. Leandros, who's still loyal but concerned, also raises objections, telling him that the Codex Astartes explicitly doesn't support this action. He's not trying to be difficult, he's genuinely concerned, and honestly, who wouldn't be? Captain Titus brushes him off and mockingly tells him to try to keep up. But Leandros isn't wrong here. Charging headlong into a war zone without a plan isn't strategic brilliance, it's a gamble, one that nearly gets them killed. Now, it's definitely a cool moment for us as the players, but lore-wise, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Even still, Leandros follows his captain into the fray. Now, it's not uncommon for Leandros both in and out of universe to frequently get characterized as being inflexible in his beliefs and unable to deviate from the Codex Astartes, which will come up a few times throughout this video. But shortly after this opening, we see something that immediately breaks this narrative, as it's Leandros, not Titus, who comes up with the idea to destroy the orc-controlled macro cannon by rigging a melta-charge to one of its shells. The plan is ultimately a success and the gun ends up getting destroyed. It's honestly a pretty impressive display of battlefield initiative for a Codex thumper. Even Sidonis praises him for it. Now things escalate when the squad encounters Inquisitor Drogon and his mysterious power source, which turns out to channel warp energy. Titus is oddly trusting of the Inquisitor, despite constant secrecy, potential danger, and mounting red flags. Leandros, by contrast, grows increasingly alarmed and jumps to the conclusion that this device is linked to chaos. And as will become a pattern throughout this video, Titus and Sidonis once again brush him off. And that's because warp energy has been used by other Imperial devices in the past. But here's the thing, Leandros' gut instinct here is absolutely right, but I'm getting ahead of myself. A little bit after this, they locate the device and fight off a bunch of orcs. Titus grabs the thing in his own hands, which triggers a huge explosion of warp energy. But miraculously, he's totally fine. That's something that definitely shouldn't have happened, as Drogon later explains. One should not be able to touch the warp and walk away unscathed unless they themselves are part of chaos. But Titus seems to be the exception to this for some reason. Now shortly after this, chaos finally shows its face and we're introduced to the true villain behind what's happening here on Graia. You see, the Inquisitor was lying to them, and by using the device to power a weapon known as the Scourge, the only thing they really managed to accomplish is open a portal for demons to start flooding onto this world, as well as the Chaos Lord Nemeroth. Drogon is revealed to be nothing more than one of his corpse puppets, and after this, Nemeroth takes a particular interest in Titus. He finds him fascinating for his ability to resist the touch of the warp, just like himself. He praises him for helping his plans unfold. The implication here being that Titus, whether knowingly or not, has just worked to further the agenda of chaos. So at this point, Leandros is fearing the worst, and if we're fair here, who can really blame him? Titus is exhibiting resistance to warp corruption, which again is a massive red flag. He's been making all kinds of rash, impulsive decisions, at least from Leandros' perspective, as they all seem to go directly counter to the rules that he's been taught to hold sacred. Something that a chaos double agent would do. And worst of all, Titus never takes the time to explain himself or have a real conversation about what's going on. Over and over, he dismisses Leandros' concerns and often just straight up mocks him. Leandros can't see inside of his mind. He doesn't know his captain's intentions. So from his perspective, there are three possibilities here. Either one, Titus is deceiving them and is in fact a Chaos double agent, or two, he's a double agent for Chaos that doesn't know he's a double agent for Chaos and is being manipulated by Chaos, or three, he's completely innocent. But here's the thing about Warhammer 40k, and it conjures the age-old adage of the Inquisition. In the grimdark future, innocence proves nothing. One could live their entire life furthering the agenda of the Chaos Gods with every single action that they take, and never fully understand that this is happening. Chaos, by its very nature, is insidious and manipulative to the extreme. It may be true that Titus truly believes he isn't a heretic, but ultimately, that doesn't really matter. And Leandros understands this. But he's hesitating. He's not sure. He still needs a little bit more evidence, but the clock is ticking. His inaction could directly lead to a disaster of apocalyptic proportions. A little bit after this, he once again raises his concerns, pointing out that Titus has now held the device unshielded twice and survived, that the Codex warns those in league with Chaos can withstand the warp's touch. Sidonis tells him enough, this isn't the time or place to be having this conversation, and Titus, to his credit, does tell him that he doesn't take this warp resistance lightly, but agrees with Sidonis that now was not the time. The search for answers would have to wait until after they dealt with the current Chaos invasion, but Leandros warns them that it could be too late by then. Which, I'm going to be real with you, going through this game again for this video and watching all of these cutscenes again, I feel the same frustration with Leandros that I did a decade ago. However, I've learned a lot about this franchise in the last decade, and looking at these events here again, I don't think Leandros is wrong here. If Titus is unknowingly being manipulated here and guided into a set course of actions that will ultimately bring about a Chaos victory, not taking like a minute to talk about this seems kind of insane. Like, Leandros is the only one of them who's actually acting like an Ultramarine here. Now, admittedly, at the time this game came out, this was 5th edition Warhammer, which was the Matt Ward era of Warhammer. Now, we're not going to get into all of the controversy surrounding him and his contributions to the setting, but at this time, the Ultramarines had deviated way far away from what they were supposed to be, and they kind of became the Mary Sue chapter, where they would have rules and things that made them unique on Monday, but on Tuesday, in the name of doing something really super duper cool, all of that lore would just be thrown out the window. This scene in the game is a perfect moment for the iconic Ultramarines practice of throwing around practicals and theoreticals. But again, that doesn't happen. A little while after this, Sidonis ends up taking the warp device for safekeeping, but unfortunately ends up getting killed by Nemeroth, causing the power source to fall into the Chaos Lord's hands. To his credit, Leandros only shows up after Nemeroth has vanished and Titus is leaning over Sidonis' corpse. Now, you would think that this would play into his suspicions that Titus is a heretic, but to his credit, that doesn't really seem to be the case. He doesn't blame Titus for his brother's death, but you would think that this would play as vanished Chaos Lord's hand. Unfortunately, ends up getting killed by Nemeroth, causing the power source to fall into the Chaos Lord's hands. To his credit, Leandros only shows up after Nemeroth has vanished and Titus is leaning over Sidonis' corpse. Now, you would think that this would play into his suspicions that Titus is a heretic, but to his credit, that doesn't really seem to be the case. He doesn't blame Titus for his brother's death, but there is something that he is suspicious about. Titus' statement that they should split up, that he will face the Chaos Lord alone, when he is most vulnerable and attempting to ascend into a demon prince. Leandros tells him point blank that that's either suicide or worse, exactly what the Chaos Lord wants. Titus, understanding the implication of Leandros' questions, asks him if he thinks he's falling to chaos, and Leandros tells him that he doesn't. But we can see in his expression that he's not entirely convinced of those words. How can he be? Titus is a great man for sure, but far greater men than him, even the Primarchs, have been corrupted by chaos. As always, Titus doesn't bother to reassure him or have a meaningful discussion. He just brushes him off again with more cryptic bravado. After this, we move into the end of the game and the big showdown between Titus and Nemeroth. This is where Nemeroth himself confirms that Titus is intrinsically linked to the warp. Whether intentionally or not, everything he's been doing up until this point has been furthering his agenda. It's ironic as they're both on polar opposite ends of the spectrum, but this demon prince and Leandros have come to the same conclusion about Titus. In the final moments of the game, we're shown an inquisitorial gunship touching down, and out steps an inquisitor and a retinue of Black Templars, who ask Leandros if he's sure of his accusation, to which Leandros tells them that he is. Titus is a traitor and a heretic. Now, of course, Titus denies this because from his perspective, he's a goddamn hero. He's as loyal as they come. He just banished a demon prince back to oblivion. But the Inquisitor asks him if it's possible that he had unholy assistants, to which Titus doesn't really have an answer. In order to prevent a full-blown investigation into the Ultramarines and all of the guardsmen and women on Graia, Titus agrees to go with them willingly and submit to the Inquisition's will. In his parting words to Leandros, he tells him that he has failed at being an Ultramarine. And that's where their storyline came to a close until the second game released over 10 years later. Now, Leandros would be present throughout the events of the second game as well, but that's not something that's revealed. As it turns out, he was seemingly rewarded for his betrayal of Captain Titus, as he's now become a chaplain, something that caught a lot of fans off guard, and to many, didn't really make any kind of sense. Why was this guy rewarded for snitching? But Wes, I hear a few of you asking, why would they make someone a chaplain who clearly does not respect the chaplain's authority? Didn't he go against the chain of command when he made his report to the Inquisition instead of the Reclusium? Doesn't it explicitly state in the Codex Astartes that issues of suspected corruption are supposed to be handled in-house? Doesn't that make him a hypocrite? If he's preaching the virtue of the Codex one minute, only to go against its tenets the next, and also conveniently condemning Titus of the same behavior? No, it doesn't, and no, he didn't. Next question. All right, wait a minute, hold up. Actually, that one does deserve a little bit more of an explanation, as I'll fully admit, it's not something I realized myself until I did a whole bunch of research first. Many Warhammer 40k fans believe that suspected corruption cases are almost always handled in-house by a chapter's chaplains, that the Codex Astartes states the Inquisition should not be called upon unless absolutely necessary, and then the only ones who have the authority to make that call are the chaplains or the chapter master himself. This is why many Warhammer fans call Leandros a hypocrite. He spends the game preaching adherence to the Codex and condemning Titus for breaking from its teachings, yet when push comes to shove, he goes against the code he claims to hold in such high regard by ignoring the chain of command and bringing his accusation right to the top. At face value, this take makes a lot of sense, and it's why I believe it's such a common argument against Leandros. I'll admit it's one that I believe myself for quite some time. However, in doing research for this video, I could not find a single source that explicitly states this to be so. What I believe has happened here is that two parallel pieces of lore that are not inherently linked together have been combined in the minds of fans in order to justify their hatred of Leandros, which, in fairness to them, they don't really need to justify why they hate Leandros. It's totally okay to hate this character. But when they invoke the lore to validate their feelings, now we gotta talk about it. First off, it's true that one of the roles of a chaplain is to monitor their brothers for weakness of spirit, faith, and will. The vast majority of the time, corruption cases will in fact be handled by them, and in some cases, also the librarians. Now second, it's also true that Space Marine chapters do not always see eye to eye with the Inquisition, and would be wary of courting an investigation by them. If it's done in-house, they can quietly deal with it themselves. If the Inquisition gets involved, the consequences could be dire. In extreme cases, the entire chapter may be condemned as heretics for the actions of one individual. However, this does not mean there's always an antagonistic relationship between these two organizations. Opinions will differ from chapter to chapter and individual to individual, but for the most part, the Inquisition is held in high esteem, especially by the Ultramarines, who again are the most compliant by-the-book founding chapter. Chaplains also are not nearly as specialized as an Inquisitor when it comes to rooting out heresy. That's only part of a chaplain's job, whereas for an Inquisitor, one with the authority of the Emperor himself and unlimited resources at his disposal, who spent their entire life studying exactly this, an investigation handled by them is going to almost always be much more thorough. Okay, so maybe it makes sense for some Space Marines sometimes to reach out directly to the Inquisition, but it still doesn't make sense for Leandros, right? He's obsessed with following the rules of the Codex Astartes, and doesn't that book specifically say to never get the Inquisition involved? Now, I've seen this take floating around a lot on the internet, and I'll be honest, I don't exactly know where it comes from, considering that the Codex is mostly centered around tactics, chapter organization, and how a Space Marine should conduct themselves. Unfortunately, we do not have a physical copy of the Codex to read for ourselves, so we'll never be 100% sure of what is and is not contained within its pages outside of direct quotes from characters in the books or games. But we can make a pretty educated guess that it contains zero information pertaining to the Inquisition. Remember, Rabute Guilliman wrote the Codex in the 21st year of the 31st millennium, right after the Horus Heresy had concluded. He would then be wounded by his brother Fulgrim at the Battle of Thalza 1 century later and placed in stasis. Now, the Inquisition's timeline, on the other hand, is unsurprisingly mysterious and shrouded in secrecy, just like most things in 40k. We know that it has its roots in the heresy, but we also know that it wouldn't be considered a formal branch of imperial power for several millennia after Guilliman's wounding. By the time of the War of the Beast, halfway through the 32nd millennium, the Inquisition was depicted as a single order operating off of a single planet, and nobody knew about them, a far cry from what they would eventually become. Now, as Guilliman would not have known about the Inquisition until his resurrection, he also probably wouldn't have written anything about them until after he woke back up, which was long after the events of Space Marine 1. The big takeaway here is that although we would expect something like Leandros' accusation of heresy against Titus to always be handled in-house, that's not always the case, and the Inquisition getting involved really isn't that weird. This is one of those things that's more backed up by vibes than concrete lore, and it's something that's been inferred by fans and repeated ad nauseum to the point where it's been taken as fact. For the sake of the argument though, let's say that even if it's technically allowed, going to the Inquisition instead of the chaplains is, at bare minimum, seen as a big taboo, right? It's fair to assume that even if he didn't technically break any rules, he still messed up in that regard. Here's the thing, I don't think so. But that's because I don't think Leandros actually contacted the Inquisition at all. Bear with me on this. Throughout the events of the first game, we never see a chaplain that Leandros could have reported to. This has led some of Leandros' defenders to argue that the Inquisition was the only available institution to make the report to. And that does make some sense, but I take a few issues with this. Just because we never see a chaplain on the ground doesn't mean that they aren't there, whether they're fighting planetside in a different location, or more likely are stationed in orbit on a strike cruiser. The Vox systems that Leandros, Titus, and Sidonis would have access to would be able to contact one of these chaplains no problem. But you know who they wouldn't be able to contact? The Inquisition. But wait, Wes, I hear you saying, wasn't the Inquisition already on Graia? That's true, Inquisitor Drogon was here, but there's two issues with that. Number one, it said that he had been dead for many years. They had just met his flesh puppet. Number two, just because one Inquisitor's here doesn't mean there's a larger group of them somewhere else. Inquisitors tend to act alone or in their own small cabals. Number three, now assuming Leandros did have that information, he had a way of contacting the Inquisition. His Vox system wouldn't be strong enough to get a message off-world. It would require a trained astropath. And there was literally no opportunity at any point in the game where he could have slipped away, found one, and gotten that message out. Remember in Space Marine 2, just getting to the astropath in that one to send a message to Calgar was like a multi-mission ordeal. And what they were dealing with on Graia, admittedly it was orcs and demons versus Tyranids and Zangors, but it was kind of the same situation. Given all of this, I truly believe that Leandros didn't actually break the chain of command here. He didn't violate the Codex Astartes in that way. He did what he was supposed to. He contacted the Reclusium, who determined that the Inquisition needed to be involved. The chaplains made the report on his behalf, then informed Leandros that an Inquisitor was en route. The Inquisitor we meet at the end would have already been briefed on the situation. He knew who Leandros was, and when he asks if he's sure of his accusation, it's not because they've already spoken, it's because the relevant information had already been relayed to him by the chaplaincy. This is one of those things that's not really spelled out for us in game, so I'll admit I can't prove this one, but just based on the lore, it's the only thing that actually makes sense here. Now, I'll admit this next one's a little bit of a side tangent, but it's a common criticism I see get leveled against Leandros pretty often, and that's that he's young and inexperienced in Space Marine 1. Many fans claim that the reason he's so rigidly attached to the Codex Astartes is that he hasn't lived long enough to develop the kind of battlefield pragmatism that Titus embodies. But there are a few problems with this argument. First and foremost, Leandros is not some fresh-faced neophyte. He's a full-fledged battle brother serving in the command squad of the Ultramarine 2nd Company. That's massive. This position implies not only a significant amount of combat experience, but also a level of tactical aptitude and reliability far beyond the average line Marine. Now, it is true that Leandros is the youngest member of the squad. Both Titus and Sidonis visibly wear 2 service studs in their forehead, indicating over 2 centuries of service, whereas Leandros doesn't have any studs, suggesting that he's served for less than 100 years. But even within that time frame, he's likely been in active, constant service for anywhere from 40 to 99 years. That's not a rookie, that's a battle-hardened Space Marine who has likely fought through multiple campaigns across multiple war zones. To reach this point, Leandros would have had to complete not only his initial transformation from neophyte to full Astartes, but also rotate through multiple companies. By the time a Marine reaches the 2nd Company, he's already survived decades of combat, proven his worth, and demonstrated command-level potential. The idea that he's some inexperienced kid who just doesn't know better, that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. What we're really seeing here isn't a lack of experience, it's a difference in perspective. Leandros isn't inexperienced, he's devout. He isn't inflexible because he's green, he's inflexible because he truly believes that the Codex is the Primarch's will made manifest. And why wouldn't he believe that? This is what he has explicitly been taught. Remember, if he's in the 2nd Company, then that means he's served in the 6th, and one of the core things Ultramarines learn in the 6th Company is how to think for themselves. This is the point in their journey where they're actively told to push back against the Codex, to question its teachings and identify areas in which it can be improved. But some people misunderstand what this lesson is supposed to be about. The idea is that for as great as Guilliman and the Codex are, it's impossible for them to have the answers to everything this galaxy could possibly throw at you. If you adhere to its teachings, the Codex will give you answers for 999,999 engagements out of 1,000,000, but the one in which it doesn't, the one in which you're fighting an enemy that Guilliman had never encountered or a situation he could never have anticipated, that's the one where you need to be able to think outside of the box in order to complete your mission and make sure you and your brothers come home safely. This lesson is not a free pass to throw on a jump pack and jump out of a Thunderhawk in an active war zone because you think it's cool, needlessly endangering your brothers and the mission just because it makes for an awesome video game intro. And make no mistake,